Um, what's up, guys? Happy Tuesday. Welcome back to another episode of Eat, Train, Prosper. Today is Bryan and myself. And if you caught that, I am laughing because I literally forgot my opening line for the podcast, even though I say it every single week. As you know by now, I open with the exact same thing for the most part. Anyway, this week, Bryan and I are talking about goal setting through a mesocycle. So this was a question that came in that we thought would be a really, really good one to kind of explode out into an episode, and we are going to dive in. But before that, as always, Bryan, can you kick us off with some updates, please?
Yeah, I think this may be the least amount of updates that I've had in a really long time. Maybe I should just try to fabricate some so we have some more content. But basically, I am not wearing glasses today, and I have now been pretty much headache free for about a week. So since our last episode, I noted on the last episode that they were improving. I noted that it wasn't my vision, and so that's good. And then I don't really know why they're better now, but they are, and I am super thankful for it. So at least when it comes to my headaches, I guess we'll hear about yours. But yeah, mine have been solid. Waking up with good energy, focused throughout the day. No things seem to instigate them, no exercise or computer or foods or anything. They're just gone. It was it really is one of the weirdest things for me because I don't have these types of odd conditions just pop up. And so it was pretty disconcerting for a few weeks to be like, I have these headaches and I don't know what's causing them and they're not going away. And it seemed like this chronic thing. And then to have it didn't just go away one day. It was kind of gradual over a week, but then to have them dissipate, it's weird coming out of it and not having any understanding of how or why it happened. And so if it pops up again, I don't know what to do or why it happened. So just a little disconcerting, confusing, whatever, but mostly just thankful that the headaches are gone. How are yours?
I had forgotten about it until I saw in your updates about the headaches. So mine are mostly gone. What I have found now is very, very, very high exertion sets. So they will set in on the hack squat. But today I had a push session, no headaches, which was nice. So the past 2 Tuesdays, the push session is when the headache has been the worst, and then it persisted all day. That being said, I did swap an exercise today. I had been they would show up when I was doing an anterior delt press with a dumbbell. So I swapped that for a machine overhead press instead because I thought to myself, the last 2 Tuesdays, my headache showed up in the gym and then I had it literally for the next 10 hours until I went to bed, and I don't want to deal with that again. So I was like, I'm going to swap the exercise. It could be the exercise as we touched last week around me pulling something in my back, overhead pressing many, many times. So I decided to skip that, but it has been better. So I have been much more diligent on putting it's a hard foam roller, not it's like a PVC wrapped in some foam. So it's significantly harder than I have the peanut lacrosse ball here that I've been putting, on either side of my spine, and doing that. I have been much more diligent with that, and they have been, improving. So leaps, bounds better from 2 weeks ago for sure.
Sweet. That's awesome. Yeah. I just realized I kind of have another update too. So I'll kind of wrap all of these in together. But I have this, so just kind of spontaneous trip planned. Some of the guys that are doing this Moab bike race with me are actually heading up for a weekend trip to Fruta, which is about an hour from Moab. It's on the Colorado side of the border over there. And apparently it's some of the best mountain biking around Colorado. So 3 of these guys have campers and they're heading up to do a weekend mountain biking trip this coming weekend. And they invited me. And my first response was, of course, no, I have this with the kids, and I have, a dentist appointment with Bryson on Monday, and 1,000 reasons that I couldn't go. And then I asked Kim, because the guy was like, yeah, maybe just ask Kim and see what happens. And I was like, all right, well, she's going to say no, So I asked her and she was like, yeah, I think we can probably make that work. And I was like, oh, awesome. So this coming weekend on Saturday morning, I'm going to head up to Fruta, and we're going to bike Saturday, Sunday, and then come back Monday. So just a day and a half of biking up there, camping with the guys or whatever, which should be fun. But kind of along the lines of this cardio thing, I I had a huge week of cardio last week. I think I did 5 zone 2 sessions, which is the most that I've hit in a week. And this is one of the things I was talking about on Danny Matronga's podcast when I was on last week or the week before. We were talking about the concurrent training research and adaptations to each and things along those lines. And I noted one of my frustrations with all this cardio I've been doing is that at least as it correlates to the VO2 max that gets pinged on my watch every day when I work out, there hasn't been any improvement, like literally no improvement. My VO2 max is the same from August before I started all this cardio to now. So one of the things I did, just trying to figure it out, is I went back and re-listened to 6 hours of podcasts on the Atia podcast where he had Inigo-san Milan on. And Inigo-san Milan is like the world's foremost researcher on zone 2 cardio, type 2 diabetes, mitochondrial function, stuff like that. He essentially uses cardio as a tool to treat mitochondrial dysfunction and cardio and diabetes, on top of also being a coach to Tadej Pogacar, the essentially #1 Tour de France cyclist in the world. He's like his coach and he programs all of his training and stuff like that. So he has this really cool, unique perspective where he works both with general population people using cardio as a way to cure sickness and mitochondrial dysfunction, but also the perspective of working with the top athletes in the world when it comes to mitochondrial function and cardiorespiratory output and stuff like that. So a number of months ago, I wrote him an email because I had found out that this dude lives in Boulder, does his training in Boulder, and is a professor at one of the CU campuses where he has a lab. And you can essentially, according to this article I read in 2015 or 14, you can essentially go into his lab, pay $300 to $500, have this full assessment of like mitochondrial function, VO2 max, cardiorespiratory output, like all these different things. And then he designs you a cardio program based on the precise information that he gathered from you, the individual. So I was obviously extremely excited about this. I wrote him an email a number of months ago. He never responded. I also checked his Instagram where he hadn't posted for a number of months. And I was like, shit, maybe this dude's not around anymore. Fast forward to like last week, and there's like 3 new Instagram posts that popped up on my feed from him. And I was like, oh, dude is active again. Let's do this, you know? So I wrote him a DM, never responded. So then he posted another thing like a few days ago, and I commented on his post that I was like, dude, I've emailed you, I've DM'd you, I'm trying to get a hold of you to get into your lab. Like, what do I have to do this? And he wrote back and said, oh, the university took away my funding. I no longer have the ability to do these kind of cool experiments on people in my lab. And I was like, oh, well, that is beyond unfortunate. And essentially leaves me back at square one, which is, I don't know why I'm doing all this cardio and nothing is improving. Circling back to the Danny Matronga podcast that I referenced, one of the things I was talking about on there is needing to decide what is your 1A and your 1B when you're doing concurrent training, because you can't fully focus on both of them simultaneously and expect to get results on both of them. And so I am not, and this is what I said on the podcast too, I'm not like fully ready to be like, cardio is now my 1A and lifting is my 1B. But one of the things that Inigo-san Milan was constantly hammering on this 6 hours of podcast that I listened to about zone 2 training is that he tends to see 2 to 3 times a week of zone 2 to be a maintenance dose for people that are already in decent, like moderate shape. And that to see adaptations from zone 2 cardio, he recommends 5 to 6 sessions a week of zone 2 at 60 to 90 minutes per session. And so that's obviously like a huge time commitment and a big ask of somebody that also has a family and a job and trying to lift weights and all these things. So I'm not like at the point where I'm ready to say, you know, cardio 6 times a week for 90 minutes a session is going to be what I do. But I did fit it in 5 times last week for 45 minutes a session. And so we will see. I still, you know, my love is hypertrophy. I love training and lifting weights, and that is my time more than like I have to still force myself to go out and do cardio. It's like, oh, I have to do cardio today. Whereas it's like, I get to lift weights. So there's a number of things swirling in my head about this. Like maybe I am just doomed, given fast twitch muscle fiber dominance, to just be better at weightlifting and not be great at cardio. Maybe I do have to take weightlifting down to 2 or 3 times a week and up cardio to 6 times a week. I don't know what the actual solution is, but it has been a little annoying that I'm doing all of this cardio and not really seeing progression as it comes to like these metrics of sorts. So anyway, that's my little tirade and my fabricated update to make this a little bit longer, but I find it frustrating. I'm ruminating on it. And if any of my people listening, my cardio people, have any thoughts on the dose of cardio to elicit adaptations, I'm all ears and curious to your experience.
That, I guess before I continue, is it just the VO2 max that you are looking for in terms of the adaptation? Like what specific are you?
Well, the VO2 max that's a good question. The VO2 max is the most like acute variable that gets pinged every day on my watch. Like every day at some point, it's like your VO2 max is, and it's basically always the same as it was for the last 6 or 7 months. But I don't think that that's necessarily the only metric worth considering. Like I wish that there was a way for me to assess mitochondrial function and see whether that's improving or not. And I don't exactly know how to do that. I guess it would be through watts. Like it would be through seeing the amount of watts that I'm putting out at a given heart rate. And so what I'm noticing is that I'm able to work harder and still be in zone 2 in quotes. So now I essentially had to adjust my zones on my watch so that zone 2 is a little bit higher than it was. I think it was 126 to 137 or something like that. And I changed it to 133 to 144, I think. So I'm able to work a little bit harder and still feel like I'm in zone 2. But I don't know if this is correlating to more output of watts, which would really be the definition of whether, everything is functioning more efficiently or not. Like my heart rate going up could be so many different things going into that equation, right? So I think what I need to do is ultimately buy a power meter for my bike so that I can see what the watts are that I'm doing, and I can see whether I am in fact improving on the wattage output. I just don't know because I don't have that wattage meter. And if I'm being completely honest, like I started at a lower watt number. Like when I very, very first started in August, September, I was, hitting about 150 watts or so for my zone 2. And then a number of months ago, I was rowing and I hit 170 watts, and I was assault biking and I hit 170 watts, and I was able to sustain those for, 45 to 60 minutes. So it seemed like there was some improvement initially there, but now, like even as of a couple weeks ago, I went and did a rowing and assault bike thing. And again, I was still right around 170 watts. So from that initial improvement that occurred in the first couple months, it doesn't feel to me like there's been improvement since then.
Understood. Okay. Yeah. I did the functional power threshold test.
Threshold power. Yeah.
I keep fucking it up. FTP.
Yeah. Functional
threshold power test. I think I botched it, but then maybe I didn't, and I do just kind of suck. So I did it at my friend Matt's house, who has a sick, like Bali Villa home gym, like CrossFit style gym here. It's really, really dope. And I did it on the bike erg. I thought that made the most sense since it's essentially a cycling thing. It can measure watts and that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. So I sent this to you, but my wattage was like right at like 171, 166, something like that. Something in like the low 170s or high 160s. And my heart rate was like mid 150s for that. And then I like plug it all in, and it gave me back my zones, and they would have been like way too low. So I was like, okay, so either I'm a fucking moron or I sandbagged my FTP test.
Well, did you feel like you were going to die during your FTP test? Because
I always feel like I'm going to die. Like I come off the hack squat and my heart rate's in the 170s.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's like so FTP is the most effort you can do for an hour, right? Like the most effort you can do for an hour, where zone 2 is a sustainable effort for an hour. So zone 2, I think generally is going to be around 80 to 85% of your FTP.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I need to do it again and like push myself a little bit harder and see, but Matt did it, and then he's in very good shape, cardiovascular shape. But his output was like a 220 average at like the same heart rate compared to my like 168 or something. And I was like, okay.
So if he's doing a 220 FTP, then that makes his zone 2 like 190 or something along those lines. And depending on like, what does he weigh? Is he around your size?
He is generally yes, but he's like wrapping up a deficit. I'm bigger, he's like, I think he's like 80 kilo, maybe 85 kilos.
Oh, wow. Kilos, yeah. So he's doing over 2 watts per kilo as his zone 2, and his zone 3 or his FTP would be almost 3 watts per kilo.
Yeah, he's in good shape. Let's put it that way.
That's really impressive. So if you do the FTP again, the way that most people do it is they do a 20-minute and then they discount it 20% for it being only 20 minutes instead of an hour. So that way you at least don't have to commit an hour to it.
There's no way I'm doing an hour. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Any other updates from you?
No, that's it. I think that's plenty.
Okay, so the only update I have, I will have a follow-up from the previous weeks. I hit my hack squat number. So I took 200 keys for, I hit my 10 reps, right? I posted that on my story, which by the time you are watching this, it is long gone. And next week I will get 1 stab at 5 plates per side on the hack squat, which I am pumped about. And then I won't have a hack squat for like a couple weeks. So we'll see how that goes. So I was really, really pumped about that. Massive anxiety about it. It's literally like it's the hardest thing I do all week, like literally, and massive anxiety about like I said, like I think, and it's a great segue into the conversation. We can skip my other update. The question for me right now becomes like, how much longer can I progress, right? I've literally added weight or reps on the hack squat for 15 weeks straight. How much longer can that actually go? And that is my fear now going into it, because I'm like, numbers don't go up forever as much as we would love them to. But when am I going to be like, oh, it happened sort of thing? So that is my big fear there. And I think as is a great segue into today's topic.
Yeah. I mean, I watched your hack squat set. It looked awesome and very painful, of course. And you did end up actually making it into a reel for your main feed, so people can actually go back and see that.
Yeah, that's the back off set and drop set. So like I have, 1 top set, which is a 6 to 10 rep range. I have a back off set, which is supposed to be at 80%, but I've had to push it up. I think my back off set's at 90%, because if not, I don't want to do fucking 20 reps, on the back off and then go into the drop. And then the drop. So that is up there. It is soul sucking. Let's put it that way.
I couldn't imagine doing like the combo of like doing the back off set immediately into the drop must be like 20 to 25 reps, right?
I went 12 and 11 and 13 or 11 and 12 or something like that. So I was like 21, 22 reps, something like that.
No, that's amazing. And I think a lot of this progress you've been making can probably be attributed to your consistent weight gain. Like I'm going to guess if you were just hanging out at like the high 190s or low 200s and being at maintenance, this probably wouldn't be progressing quite in the same manner that it is.
I agree 100% there. Yeah.
But like, just to frame this question, it had one little nuance or caveat to it that I think is probably somewhat important for our discussion. So this question came through my DM a number of months ago, and we just haven't had a chance to really address it on the podcast yet. But it said, how do you set goals for each mesocycle? I'm a goal-driven person and struggle setting goals since I am no longer focused on 1 rep maxes. And so I think the 1 rep maxes piece is the nuance that I'm referring to. Because there's definitely like overridingly a different way that you approach training when you have a 1 rep max and your objective is to beat said 1 rep max at the end of said training cycle. Because it kind of flips the script on the philosophical approach to progressive overload in a sense. Not that you can't apply that to like a more powerlifting objective, but you do have these really like concrete numbers that you're trying to exceed, where in hypertrophy, you're more chasing a stimulus. So it can be a little bit ambiguous if you're not actually specifically trying to overload and reach a given load for reps each mesocycle. And I don't necessarily think that that's the best way to approach hypertrophy, is to say, well, I hack squatted, 200 kilos last time, so now I have to do 205 or whatever it is. Like it's just a different approach to it when you're not looking at 1 rep maxes. And so we just thought this was a great question to address. And I think a lot of it is going to come down to psychology, which is obviously a huge part of any training endeavor.
Yeah. I mean, it shouldn't be funny to me anymore, but there's like, as we're speaking, like, I'm like, okay, I have these points I want to hit and that sort of thing. And then like, you just literally like chop them down, like one by one, like say the exact same things I was going to say. And then I'm like, here we are. The psychology thing is huge. And as someone, and like, obviously Bryan has too, like we've spent a number of years on both sides of it. I personally was someone that like the working off of percentage and 1 rep maxes and stuff, it crippled me. I never performed well on that. And I'm not, bashing that methodology or whatever, but like I could never perform at the percentages. It would be like, okay, we do this now 95% for like a triple, and I would get 1, and then it would just like fuck my head up. And I'm like, we're only 4 weeks into this program. I'm already falling behind. I can't hit the numbers. Like it fucking derailed me, and I would go through mesocycles and like wouldn't progress in that sort of thing. And, partially those failures is a reason I'm, much more partial to the forgiving, nature of mesocycles and hypertrophy. But on the flip side of it is I wouldn't, this is my, personal standpoint, I wouldn't try to micromanage it. Right. Because one, there's other factors that, I'm not sure if we're going to get into in this episode or not, that play a large role in your progression. Like Bryan and I just talked about, I'm at a very high body weight that for me comparatively from where I've hung out the last like 4 years. Food is consistently higher. And I have everything to throw at this. You know what I mean? Outside of like work, lifting weights is literally the only thing I do. So it does get a good amount of my life force, and I'm able to progress a lot. But if you would have told me in January, hey, like what's a goal to set for this, block, I wouldn't have said it nearly as, lofty as where I am now. And then I think I would have like kind of undershot myself a little bit because I would have crossed it and then be like, well, what next? Maybe I should move that goal to like the Smith machine, squat or something like that, instead of just being like, hey, it's working really well, I'm not going to fuck with it, sort of thing. So I think what I would, what I'm really trying to wrap up is like, I wouldn't necessarily try to overly micromanage it. And that is because of the forgiving nature of hypertrophy training. It is a little bit different than working off like the 1RM and that sort of approach.
Yeah, no, it was really well said. And like we've talked at length on here about why we don't think percentages are great to use unless, you're writing the program yourself or you have a coach that knows you really well. Because if you knew yourself or if your coach knew you, they would know that 95% is not a weight that you can do a double or a triple at. Like, that would be an 88% or something along those lines, because everybody's fiber type and blah, blah, all of that's different. But I do, it's interesting because I do see a lot of parallels between how you would approach hypertrophy and how you would approach, trying to beat a 1 rep max. Because when you look at your 1 rep max on a movement, and then you go into a cycle where your goal is to improve that 1 rep max, it's not like every week you're trying to beat your 1 rep max. So you deadlift 500, and then the next week you're like, now I'm going to deadlift 505, and then now I'm going to deadlift 510, right? You look at it on much more of a macro scale where you're like, well, my 1RM is 500 pounds. And so I'm going to go through this whole big long cycle of, 5 to 10 weeks. And then at the end of this 5 to 10 week cycle, my goal is to beat my 1 rep max of 500 pounds. And so there's these stepping stones that are implemented as part of the process to get you to your objective. And I don't see hypertrophy being different than that. It's just a different rep range. And so I think this may be like a good jumping off point to kind of go into like progression through a mesocycle. Because this is something we've touched on maybe a year ago. We had an episode about it, but it's been a long time and we have a bunch of new listeners. And so when you are progressing through a mesocycle, I don't think you necessarily have to take the approach of trying to set a new PR every week. In the case of Aaron's situation with his hack squat that he keeps referencing, this is happening because of the fact that he's putting on weight and he's got this kind of new approach to training, and he's working with a coach that has him going to failure essentially every week on this top set. And then if he makes his reps, then that would warrant an increase in weight. And then, if he makes his reps, then again, increase weight. And the process kind of just continues. But it's reactive. If he doesn't make his reps, then he doesn't increase weight. So that part is different than, you would see in a 1RM percentage based progression plan where it's like, hey, we did 88% this week, we're going to do 90% the next week, or whatever that kind of semi-linear or wave progression is. There's kind of a plan involved in it. Whereas with Aaron's approach to the hack squat, it's much more reactive and based on his prior performance. So there's subtle differences there, but like the way that I progress through a mesocycle, it's more going to similarly emulate the look of a cycle that is like, say, a 6 to 10 week period where you try to exceed your 1 rep max from the prior cycle. So like in my progression model where we start, we won't go into at this moment the difference between short movements and lengthened movements. We'll just say that movements are going to start slightly further from failure. And then week to week, we're going to work closer and closer and closer to failure until the end of the cycle. When you butt up against failure, you work as hard as you're going to work. And then that provides you a kind of obvious point of, hey, this was the most weight that I could do for X number of reps. And then, I would have a reset week at that point, which is sort of like a deload, but I just call it a reset week because it doesn't always mean that I'm trying to facilitate recovery as much as trying to reset my progression model to build momentum again. I kind of think of it like that a little bit. And so when I then reset and then go through my next 6 to 8 weeks of progression where I start further from failure and I build week to week, and then eventually I end up again at failure, my goal in that final week is to beat whatever I achieved in the prior mesocycle's final week. And so in a sense, we're kind of comparing apples to apples. We're just not doing it week to week basis. It's more of like this macro view of like, well, 8 weeks ago I did this, and now I have this plan that I'm putting together so that 8 weeks from now I can try to beat what I did 8 weeks prior. And so, yeah, I think in many ways it is a similar model to how you would approach trying to exceed your 1RM on a movement over the course of a cycle.
Yeah, that's really, really well said. I think one thing that you said that I think we should really kind of give more time to is like looking at it from like a mesocycle to a mesocycle sort of thing. Or, I mean, that's because that's a very obvious, like, hey, and this is a reason why it's great to have like be tracking your training in a log app or a log book or something like that, so that you can go back and compare. Because let's face it, like memory's poor. You know what I mean? I would say like if you're like, okay, Bryan, what did you do for these, 8 movements at the end of like your mesocycle in November or whatever? Like you could probably get to within like 10% accuracy, but like that 10% progress is probably more progress than you would even make in a mesocycle. So that's like the importance of keeping, decent notes and things there.
Yeah.
But the reason looking at it from a grander scale is like, because it's not always going to be linear. Like for example, yesterday hack squat went really, really good. Today was my push day. It was a higher stress work day. I kind of didn't get my food in on time like I should have, and had to go squeeze the gym in. I didn't progress on literally fucking anything, right? Like all my movements, I performed less reps, like literally across the entire day compared to the week prior. And you're going to have those days that happen where like there's so many when you are comparing like apples to apples, and you maybe last week you had a really good week where you did improve, a rep across the board. Maybe you have one of those days where you improved 2 reps, but sleep is lower, right? Maybe you're a little bit dehydrated. In the research or evidence, I should say, on dehydration is quite it's quite telling. Like it's like a 2% dehydration, which is not much. Like your performance output is notably less. There's these little things that impact it, and that's why like sitting on a grander scale is more. It's better for comparison, is what I'm really trying to say.
Yeah. No, that's a really good point. And I mean, I really do think that if you're chasing 1RMs, you do look at it over the course of that longer scale. Like nobody's trying to beat their 1RM every week upon week. And then I want to kind of, it's a little bit unrelated, but to touch on one thing you said about the importance of tracking as we go through, because there are certain exercises that we do in hypertrophy training, specifically like compound leg movements where you're just completely stable, like a hack squat or a leg press or a pendulum or something like that. And if you don't go into the session with some sort of knowledge about what you achieved the prior week and what your objective is this week, and say you're just like, well, I'm going to hit 2 RIR or 1 RIR. I mean, that range of what you think could be 1 RIR or 2 RIR could be 6 to 15 reps. I mean, you could go into that and be like, cool, I'm not going to look at my logbook, right? I'm just going to do my set. And when I feel like I'm at 1 RIR, I'm going to stop. The amount of times that I would have stopped like 4 reps before what I actually could do, right? Just one of those things. And I know you can relate to that too.
If you go to my, Instagram profile and you find that back off set, drop set video, I have like at least 1 more rep on the back off, and I think 2 more on the drop set. And the fact that that's the fact of the matter, watching the video, that is nightmare, inducing for how it felt when I was there. And I think like there's the self-perception of how something feels, right? Especially in proximity to failure, especially like Bryan said, with those compound movements when you are stable, those sorts of things that you're using multiple synergistic muscle groups to produce force and move. They feel very, very challenging, right? However, you are generally at like an 80 to 90% output of what your capacity truly is. And that is one of those things where, like you said, you could, if you didn't know, hey, last week I did, 100 kilos or something like that, you might load like 85 on there and be like, yeah, that's a 2 RIR. But I mean, it really, really isn't. That's such a good point to bring up. That is the real benefit there. Is there's times where I'll be like warming up, and I'll be like, fuck, I did that last week. Holy shit. This
Yeah.
feels so heavy, and then I warm up a couple sets and like, sure as shit, it's moving. And I'm like, if I didn't, I literally would have sandbagged myself like hard here.
Yeah. No, for sure. And I mean, that can apply to any movement, but I think it's much more specific to these types of movements because I've actually done this experiment. I was curious when this whole philosophical approach to progressive overload came out with like Brian Miner kind of pushing it a bit, that, you really don't need to force progression, but you really just need to notice it. It was kind of the idea like, oh, that was too easy, so I should add weight next week. And so I started doing this thing where I would just not look at my logbook going into the session, and I would just try to follow RIR so that I would have like what I considered to be an accurate representation of what my RIR is for that day, given that we know that preparedness, changes day to day, et cetera, like you said, with sleep and stress and things like that. And that was exactly what I noticed, is that on certain movements, like those really big compound leg movements, if I didn't look at my logbook and then I just kind of felt in my head that I was at my designated RIR, it was always, a little bit lower than it was when I looked at my logbook and I was like, oh, well, now I have to get this number, because I basically go into it being like, I have to at least match what I did last week. I don't want to like backslide or whatever. And so then that gives you like that extra little bit of motivation and oomph, so that when you get to 6 reps and you have to get to 8, it's like, man, that 6 felt gut wrenchingly awful, but I have to get to 8, so I'm going to, type thing. And that maybe isn't as specific on movements like curls and pull downs and like stuff like that. Like I think it's a little more accurate and it's a little less subject to the oscillations in preparedness. But those oscillations in preparedness hit you really hard on those big compound leg movements.
They really do. And one thing I think is, beneficial to add on the back end of that, my personal take on the philosophical side of the hypertrophy and like big, oh wow, this is just easier this week. Like personally, I have never actually felt that. Like everything feels just as hard as it ever did. The weight just moves, and I'm like, oh, holy shit, dude, 6 reps. Like I'll tell myself, like, oh, I unrack that hack squat, and I'm like, I'll do like 2 reps, and I'm like, there's no way I'm getting 9 again. Like last week I got 9, like 2, I might get like 6 best. Yeah. And then I go for 7 and it still just moves. And I'm like, oh, okay, how about 8? And I'm like, okay, it's moving. But like, it's, that one is hard for me because I feel like it never feels like easier. Like even when I was able to like back squat, 405 and north, I would put 315 on the bar and it still felt heavy as fuck, but it just moved anyway. So that one I think is like, I think it's going to be like so much of what we're talking about, like person dependent.
Interperson dependent. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, I relate. And like going back to this guy's like original question of like, I need goal setting, I need objectives because, I have these 1RM lifts. And so one thing that I think is part of the reason that I've gravitated toward doing lower rep sets of most stuff is because it does give you a more accurate sense of whether you are progressing and kind of this ability to quote chase progression, if you want to do that. Because if you're doing a set of like 12 to 20 reps on something, or even more reps, it's subject to so many micro changes within your set. Like if you pause for a quarter of a second less at one position, or if you speed up your rep tempo by 10 or 15%, then over the course of 15 reps, you could get 2 or 3 total more reps just based on those really subtle micro adjustments that you're making to your execution. But when you're lifting in the 5 to 8 rep range, or 5 to 10, depending on the movement, which is where I usually hang out, those micro changes in your execution don't have a macro effect on the number of reps you achieve. And so that kind of leads me into one of the next things that I would suggest for this person or anybody that, struggles with this idea. And that is kind of the way that I use partials on the lengthened sets that I do. And I've discussed this, so I won't belabor the point. But essentially, when I do my lengthened sets, they follow a full range of motion set. And so say I'm doing my T-bar row and I hit 8 reps at 160. My next set, which would be considered a lengthened set, is 20 to 25% heavier than the prior set. So you would essentially increase that 160 for 8. You would increase that to 200. And then my goal would be to achieve 8 reps again. But of course, you understand that if I did 160 for 8 to failure, then when I put 200 on there, there's no way I'm getting 8 full reps. And what essentially happens is I get, say, 2 full reps, and then I get 6 partial reps to equal 8 total reps. I call it partial rep match. And that is like a really cool way where you can see progress happening quickly, because those 2 full reps can turn into 3 full reps, or you can increase 5 pounds and go from 200 to 205, but still get 2 full reps and then, finish with partials. And so there's really this like acute improvement that you can see week to week. And over the course of a mesocycle, like I've had periods where, I'll start a row movement or something like that with 1 full rep plus 7 partials. And by the end of the cycle, I'm using the same weight for 3 full reps plus 7 partials. So I'm literally getting 2 additional full reps, which would be considered, if you're just doing full reps, that would be considered a 300% improvement in your output, which is insane. Like no advanced person improves anything 300%, but using these kind of partial rep match sequences, I'm able to have partial reps turn into full reps. And then being able to see that week to week is extremely motivating for me, and kind of something I look forward to when I go into the gym is just trying to improve the number of full reps that I achieve on these partial rep match sets. So just kind of setting goals that don't necessarily have to be specific to your 1RM, or to, in Aaron's case, improving his hack squat 5 kilos or whatever it is. There are many ways that you can kind of manipulate that to notice improvement across your lifts week to week.
Yeah, I think I'm trying to think of like my kind of big picture thing here, and I love the approach of like the goal setting, right? But what the thing that I keep coming back to is like, because when like strength training is more of like a science, pretty much. It's because the outcome is more concrete sort of thing, right? Like when you're just trying to get generally stronger, increase in hypertrophy. Yes, like if we're going like muscle biopsy and all of those things, like is it possible? Like, yes. Is it practical? Not by any stretch of the imagination. And kind of like coming back to what I said earlier in the podcast, like I'm a very goal driven person, very, very much so. But I wouldn't say when I approach like a new training block that I am outlining goals, because it would be really, really hard to do so. Like there's going to be times where you surprise yourself, right? Where things are just going much better than you could have anticipated. And then I feel like by having that concrete goal, you may stop things a little bit earlier. But then at the other flip side of things, like let's say life throws a season at you and you come up short because like you're sleeping 5 hours, 5.5 hours per night because you have like a newborn or something. You might be like overly critical, but by not, realizing many of these variables that come into play.
Yeah. No, I want to pick out something you said when you said that strength training is a little bit more of a science, and that sparked an idea in my head, in that, like, I believe that both hypertrophy and strength training are both science and art, but I think that strength training is more science and less art, and hypertrophy is probably a little more art and less science, or at least more art than strength training is. And so with that in mind, it's like my vision is to like go to it's Picasso that had those really wild like types of art that kind of were just like throwing colors at the page, right? Maybe. Anyways, we'll just assume that I'm right on that, even though I'm probably wrong. So this shows how much like actual art I know. But my vision is basically that like in hypertrophy, there's so many ways to roam that oftentimes it really can almost feel like you're just throwing colors at the page, and then at the end you hope that it makes some sort of semblance of sense. Whereas in strength training, it doesn't exactly work that way. Like you can't really just kind of throw random shit together beyond, your novice and early intermediate years, which, everything works. But you kind of do have to have like a much more strategic approach to your progression to get to end goal. Whereas in hypertrophy, it does feel more forgiving, in that there are many ways in which you can kind of combine those colors to create the ultimate kind of masterpiece at the end.
Yeah. I to be, in full transparency, I don't think I have anything else on the back end of this one.
Yeah, I don't really either. I mean, we
Yeah.
knew it was going to kind of be a short episode, but there's only so much you can really talk about when you added one on here that was don't get hurt, which I think
Oh
is
my God, I can't believe it. It's like
is a
the
really
first thing
good
that came to
overriding
mind.
objective as well.
Yeah. And I cannot believe I actually forgot that. It was like when we had the episode and I was like copying the notes in the document, like the very first thing is like, don't get hurt. And that's been like a motto of mine since like 2018, so like going on 5 years now. And the reality of it is I just had a rough stretch in my, like, the end of my 20s where I was just getting hurt constantly, and that's been a big one. Like, and whenever I always have to like kind of keep myself in check, like, don't get hurt, because then you can't do what you want to do. And I think that one is like, don't get greedy chasing things when, like, okay, there's 2 weeks left in the meso. My lower back is super tight and uncomfortable all the time, but I'm still going to try and like go balls to the wall on my RDLs. Like, I've been there before. Like, when I hurt my back for the first time ever in my life, like, that's exactly what happened. My back was tight. I knew it, and I still went in and did it anyway. And like, lo and behold, your back does what it does when it's giving you like very obvious signs, like, "Hey, dickhead, I'm about to pop." I think that one's big, and just knowing yourself of like, it's kind of like a live to die another day thing. When you're getting into some of those later weeks, like, you could always kick it out a week if things don't feel good, if your hip or knee feels like off, especially if you're training in the lower rep ranges, things like, you just want to be wiser there, because it can blow up on you for sure.
Yeah. And so I think that again kind of relates back to the conversation of, chasing 1RMs versus chasing hypertrophy or whatever. And when you are chasing 1RMs, I think you feel this more kind of internal inherent pressure that, like, well, because it's a science, I have to expose my body to this progressive stimulus each week, or else, the train derails off the tracks type thing. And with hypertrophy, it's more forgiving. Like, you can honor your body a little bit more, and you can understand that taking one step back can lead to 2 steps forward in the future. And it's the same with strength. It's just that most people don't really perceive it that way. Like, they look at it much more linearly. So maybe ultimately, like, the person asking the question and anyone else in this situation, maybe it really is like the psychology and the perspective that you take going into your training, and that being like the framework that needs to shift primarily, when ultimately at the end of the day, like, we're still trying to progress. We're still trying to beat what we did 6 weeks, 12 weeks, 18 weeks prior. It's just maybe a little bit more of a meandering road to get there. And that doesn't mean that you shouldn't have goals and objectives and numbers you're trying to hit per se. It's just like, it's a winding road that may take longer and may not actually happen on the exact date that you intend it to happen.
Yeah, I think that's like the clip to wrap up with. It is, with hypertrophy, often like a meandering road. Like that's such a good word to use there.
Sweet.
Anything else on the back end of this one, Bryan?
I think that's good, man.
All right. So as always, guys, thank you for listening to Eat, Train, Prosper. Bryan and I will talk to you next week.